He told his lawyer she was getting confused in her old age, that she couldn't be trusted with her own affairs. Then he slid a stack of papers across the table, smiling that reassuring smile she'd taught him, and she watched her own hand sign away her home. He thought he'd secured his inheritance. He didn't know the most powerful man in the city's courthouse was her oldest friend. Have you ever had your deepest concerns dismissed as overreacting? Have you been made to feel invisible in a crisis you were the first to see? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and speaking a hard truth? This is not a channel about forgiveness. This is a channel about consequences. We are here to document the moment the bill comes due. Stay with us and witness the full, ruinous cost of disrespect. Margaret's home wasn't made of bricks and mortar. It was built from memory. For 54 years, every scuff on the oak floor, every chip in the porcelain sink was a story. She had raised her son David within these walls. She had nursed her late husband Thomas through his final illness in the sun-drenched master bedroom. The house was the last tangible piece of a life built on devotion and quiet sacrifice. After Thomas passed, it became her sanctuary and, she assumed, the legacy she would one day leave for the son she adored. When David and his wife Jessica first suggested they move in, she felt a surge of relief. "To help you out, Mum," David had said, his voice dripping with filial concern. "We just worry about you being here all alone." At first, it was a comfort, but the comfort soon began to curdle. It started with small things. Jessica would reorganize the kitchen, and Margaret's favorite teacup would disappear into a new, illogical cupboard. When she couldn't find it, Jessica would retrieve it with a sigh. "Oh, Margaret, you forgot again. I told you I put them all up here." Then came the gentle gaslighting about her finances. David, a man who had never successfully balanced his own checkbook, would sit at her kitchen table and review her meticulous accounts. "This is all very complicated, Mum," he'd say, patting her hand. "Interest rates, capital gains, let me handle it. You don't need to trouble your mind with it." Each condensing word was a small cut. He wasn't helping. He was demoting her. In her own home, she was being relegated from matriarch to dependent. The final straw in this campaign of 1,000 cuts was a manufactured public humiliation. David had insisted on taking her to a meeting with his new slick lawyer, a man whose ambition radiated from him like cheap cologne. The topic was estate planning. In front of this stranger, David portrayed his mother as a fragile, confused old woman. "She sometimes forgets to lock the doors," David lied smoothly. "Last week, she couldn't remember her own PIN number at the store." Margaret sat in stunned silence, a hot flush of shame creeping up her neck. She had never forgotten to lock her doors. She remembered her PIN number perfectly. But to protest in that sterile office would only prove their point. She would seem hysterical, confused. So she said nothing. That night, believing her to be asleep, the whispers began outside her bedroom door. The sound, muffled by old wood, was sharper than any shout. It was Jessica first. Did he buy it? The whole dotty old woman routine? "Hook, line, and sinker," David's voice replied, low and triumphant. "The lawyer says if she's this confused, we can get her to sign a quitclaim deed. Frame it as protection. He thinks we're saving her from herself." "Good." Jessica's voice was like ice. "Because I just saw a new Land Rover that would look perfect in the driveway. Just get it done, David. This house is a gold mine." Margaret didn't move. She didn't breathe. In the quiet of her room, surrounded by 54 years of love and memory, she finally understood. She was not a mother to be cared for. She was an asset to be liquidated. She did not weep. The time for tears had passed, frozen solid by the cold shock of the betrayal. Margaret rose from the floor outside her bedroom, her movements stiff but deliberate. She walked down the hallway, past the family photos on the wall, ghosts of a love that was now a lie, and entered her late husband's study. The room smelled of old books and cedar, a scent of integrity that felt like a shield. She sat in Thomas's worn leather chair, her hands resting on the solid oak desk. This was no longer just a house. It was a battlefield, and she would not surrender it. She bypassed her modern address book. From a locked drawer in the desk, she retrieved a small, black-bound book, its pages filled with her husband's elegant script. She ran a finger down a list of names under the letter V until she found it. Vance, Arthur, home. A man answered on the second ring, his voice rich with authority, even when roused from sleep. Arthur Vance? It's Margaret Reed, she said, her own voice steady, devoid of the panic that had been screaming in her chest moments before. There was a pause, then warmth flooded the line. Margaret, good heavens, it's been too long. Is everything all right? It's late. No, Arthur, everything is not all right. David is trying to have me declared incompetent. He and his wife want to take my house. Silence descended on the line, but it was an active listening silence. It was the silence of a mind trained to process facts, to weigh evidence. Explain, Arthur said. Margaret recounted the story with cold, factual precision, the constant forgetfulness, the patronizing comments, the performance of the lawyer's office, and the final devastating conversation she had just overheard. She left out the emotion, presenting it like a case brief. When she finished, Arthur spoke, his voice hard as granite. Margaret, you are the woman who proofread my final law school thesis because you said my Latin conjugations were an insult to Cicero. Confused is not in your vocabulary. This isn't concern. It's a financial crime wrapped in a blanket of elder abuse. His words, so direct and validating, were the first breath I'd taken since I heard Jessica's voice. His lawyer is a man named Stephen Vale. I know him, Arthur said, with a note of deep disdain in his voice. A bottom feeder with ambition thinks he's clever. He paused. All right, here is what you will do. You will do nothing out of the ordinary. Tomorrow you will call David. You will sound tired, resigned, and agreeable. You will tell him he's right, and you'll sign whatever Mr. Vale recommends. Let them believe they have won. Let them get arrogant. And then, Margaret asked, and then you will call a woman named Evelyn Marsh. She's the sharpest probate litigator in this state. She has a particular dislike for Stephen Vale. Tell her Arthur Vance sent you. Tell her everything. She will know precisely how to build the cage. The next morning, Margaret made the call to David. Her voice trembled just enough. She played the part of the defeated mother perfectly. You're right, dear, she sighed into the phone. It's all too much for me now. Whatever you and the lawyer think is best, I'd trust you. The relief in his voice was sickening. He was ecstatic, already spending her equity in his head. Hours later, her phone buzzed with a text message from him. It was a picture of him and Jessica, smiling, raising champagne glasses. The text below it read, To new beginnings, so glad you're letting us take care of you now, Mum. One red heart. The signing was a quiet, solemn affair in Mr. Vale's office. David held his mother's hand, his expression a perfect mask of loving concern. Jessica stood by, a sentinel of feigned support. Margaret played her part flawlessly, her signature a little shaky, her eyes downcast as she slid the documents across the desk. She felt a cold pang as she did it. This house was her heart, and she had just handed it to her enemies. But as Arthur had said, it was a necessary sacrifice. Let them believe they have won. Let them get arrogant. And arrogant they became. Within a week, Jessica had hired decorators. Margaret's home, a testament to quiet, understated elegance, was invaded by swatches of beige and ostentatious chrome fixtures. They spoke about opening up the space, which meant erasing Margaret's memories and replacing them with a hollow modern aesthetic. They treated her like a guest, a relic, to be tolerated until she could be moved to a more suitable facility. Their true public campaign began not with a bang, but with a forwarded email. Jessica, with David's approval, sent a long, beautifully crafted message to the entire extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins. It was a masterpiece of performative concern. The subject line read, "A gentle update on our dear Margaret." The body of the email detailed their heart-wrenching decision to take over the house, portraying themselves as saviors stepping in to manage the affairs of a beloved matriarch who was, sadly, not quite herself anymore. It spoke of their immense sacrifice and asked for the family's prayers during this difficult transition. Evelyn Marsh read the email aloud in her sunlit office, her voice laced with contempt. Margaret sat opposite her, a cup of untouched tea on the table between them. "The performative concern is nauseating," Evelyn stated, placing the printout on her desk as if it were contaminated. "They are positioning you as unstable and them as martyrs, a classic preemptive strike." "What is the next step, Evelyn?" Margaret asked, her voice calm. Her initial pain had long since solidified into a cold, hard resolve. "Now we dismantled their narrative," Evelyn said, a glint in her eye. She pulled out a thin file. "I did some digging after our last talk. For the past 5 years, David has been borrowing from you, a consistent pattern of small to medium withdrawals from your savings account. Along for a car down payment here, an investment for a can't-miss crypto scan there, totaling nearly $95,000, all documented, none of it repaid." Margaret nodded slowly. She told herself those were gifts to her son. She saw now they were installments on her own obsolescence. "They've painted the picture of a confused old woman. We will counter with the picture of a financially exploitative son." She pointed to a name on the email chain. "Patricia, your older sister, the family's undisputed commander-in-chief. We don't reply to everyone. We reply only to her." A few keystrokes, and the tactical strike was launched. It was a simple, factual email from Margaret to her sister. It contained no emotion, no accusations. It contained only one thing: scanned copies of 5 years of Margaret's bank statement with every transfer to David's account neatly highlighted. The response was faster than either of them anticipated. That evening, as Margaret prepared for bed in her own home, now a hostile territory, her phone rang. It was David. His voice wasn't smooth or condescending. It was high-pitched, panicked. "What did you do?" he screeched. "Patricia just caught me. She was screaming. What did you send her?" Margaret sat on the edge of her bed, the old family quilt pulled tight around her. She looked at her reflection in the dark window, a woman they thought they had erased. "I just sent her the facts, David," she said quietly. "She can decide for herself who is confused." David's panic was the first crack in the dam, but Margaret and Evelyn knew it wouldn't be the last. The public narrative had been fractured, but the legal reality remained. He now owned the house. The villains, wounded and exposed, did not retreat. They counterattacked, predictably and foolishly. The first volley was the failed apology. A week after the disastrous call with Patricia, Jessica appeared at Margaret's door holding a bouquet of supermarket lilies, her face arranged in a mask of remorse. She found Margaret in the garden, calmly pruning her prize-winning roses. "Margaret, we need to talk," Jessica began, her voice trembling with practiced sincerity. "David and we've been so worried. We may have handled things clumsily, but our hearts were in the right place. He feels just awful about how this has all been misunderstood." Margaret clipped a dead rose from its stem with a clean snip of her shears. She didn't look up. "Misunderstood? I think I understand it perfectly. You wanted a Land Rover, and my son thought selling my dignity was a fair price for the down payment." Jessica's face fell. The practiced tears evaporated. "That's not fair. We love you. This is about protecting you." "Thank you for the flowers, Jessica," Margaret said, finally meeting her gaze. Her eyes were not angry nor sad. They were icily serene. "Please see yourself out. I have my real estate lawyer arriving shortly." The mention of a lawyer, a weapon they thought only they possessed, was a shock Jessica hadn't prepared for. She left the lilies on the garden path, retreating in disarray. The next assault came from an enabler. Margaret's younger sister, Carol, was dispatched a few days later. Carol, a woman who had always lived in Patricia's formidable shadow, arrived full of anxious platitudes. She was the peacekeeper, the one sent to smooth things over. "Maggie, what is all this?" she pleaded over tea Margaret had begrudgingly made. "You're tearing the family apart. David is a good boy. He was just trying to help. Patricia is on the warpath and you're talking about lawyers? It's just not right." Margaret listened patiently until Carol's nervous rambling ran out of steam. Then she slid a single, crisp document across the table. It was a copy of the deed transfer. "Read Section 4, Carol," Margaret said softly. Carol squinted at the dense legal text. "The life estate clause? It gives me the right to live here until my death? But it says I am solely responsible for all upkeep, repairs, property taxes, and insurance at 80 years old?" She looked up, her face pale. "Maggie, you can't afford that on your pension. Not with the new tax assessments." "Precisely," Margaret said. "David and his lawyer, Mr. Vale, were so very helpful in protecting me. They gave me the gift of a home I cannot afford to maintain. If I miss a single tax payment, the house defaults to them free and clear. Tell me, Carol, does that sound like help to you, or does it sound like a foreclosure trap?" Carol, armed with emotional pleas, had no defense against cold, contractual malice. She left in bewildered silence, her peace mission a catastrophic failure. The final, depraved gambit was, as Evelyn had predicted, the most desperate. It was a text from David, arriving late at night. It was a photo of his 10-year-old daughter, Lily, Margaret's only granddaughter. She was in a hospital bed, an IV drip attached to her arm. The text beneath read, "She's been admitted, high fever. She keeps asking for her grandma. The stress of all this is making her sick. Is this what you want, Mum?" Margaret's heart seized. This was a low she hadn't thought even David was capable of. For a moment, her resolve wavered, but then a cold clarity washed over her. She picked up her phone. She didn't call David. She called her daughter-in-law, Jessica. She answered, her voice flustered. "Margaret? Dave said he would—" "Is Lily all right?" Margaret asked, her voice dangerously quiet.
She has the flu," she stammered. "The doctor just wants to keep her overnight for observation because she got a little dehydrated." "The flu?" Margaret repeated. "So not a high fever from the stress of all this." There was a damning silence on the other end. "You put my granddaughter in a hospital bed and used her as a prop," Margaret stated, her voice shaking with rage so profound it was almost silent. "This conversation is over. Tell my son not to contact me again. My next call is his." The gauntlet of fools was run. They had thrown everything at her: fake apologies, emotional blackmail, and the health of a child. And she had weathered it all, not with shouting or tears, but with facts, logic, and a will they had fatally underestimated. Their desperation was a sign. The final checkmate was near.
The final battle would not be fought with whispers or text messages. It would be a formal execution, conducted in the one arena where lies wither under oath and only facts have standing. Evelyn Marsh had orchestrated it with the precision of a master composer. David and his lawyer, Stephen Vale, were summoned to a mandatory settlement conference at the city courthouse, not in a soulless conference room, but in the private chambers of a senior judge. A courtesy, Evelyn had explained, extended due to the age of the plaintiff and the sensitive nature of the family matter. David and Vale walked in radiating confidence. They saw Margaret, a frail-looking old woman in a simple navy dress, and Evelyn, her prim and proper counsel. They believed this was a final shakedown, a desperate attempt to renegotiate. They were prepared to offer a pittance, a small monthly stipend, to make this all go away. They took their seats at one side of the vast mahogany table. A court stenographer was already present, her presence a silent, ominous warning they chose to ignore. The doors to the inner office opened, and the judge entered. He was a formidable man of 70, with a shock of silver hair and eyes that seemed to have weighed the souls of 1,000 liars. He was not wearing his robes, but his suit carried the same gravity. He moved to the head of the table, his expression severe, disappointed. He did not look at David or Vale. He walked directly behind Margaret, placing a heavy, authoritative hand on her shoulder. He then turned his gaze to David. "David," the judge said, his voice quiet but echoing with the power of the bench, "I believe you know who I am." David's face, which had been arranged in a mask of pleasant condescension, went slack. His skin turned a pale, blotchy white. He had seen that face on the news, at charity galas, at the dedication of the law school library. This wasn't just the judge. This was Judge Arthur Vance, the presiding judge of the appellate court, a legend. Vale's professional smile froze and then shattered. His legal mind, which ran on bluffs and procedural tricks, stalled and crashed. "Arthur, Judge Vance, I didn't know." "You didn't know I was Margaret Reed's oldest friend," Vance finished for him. "That her late husband, Thomas, was my best man. That I have been a guest in the home you now fraudulently occupy more times than I can count. No, I suspect you didn't." He let the silence hang in the air, a physical weight. He then looked at Stephen Vale, a predator fixing its eyes on lesser prey. "Mr. Vale, I have reviewed the quitclaim deed you drafted. It is a masterpiece of predatory elder law. The life estate clause in particular, with its unbearable financial burden on an elderly pensioner, is a work of art. The Bars Association's Ethics Committee will be fascinated to study it in detail." Vale started to sweat. His career was flashing before his eyes. Disbarment was now a real possibility. Evelyn Marsh spoke for the first time, her voice cool and factual.
We are prepared to file a suit for fraudulent misrepresentation, undue influence, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We are also filing a formal complaint with the bar. However, my client is a merciful woman. She is willing to forgo all that on 2 conditions. She slid a document across the table. It was a new deed, one that transferred ownership of the house back to Margaret free and clear. You will sign this now. The second condition is a full court-enforced restraining order. You will not come within 500 feet of my client or her property ever again. David looked at his mother, his face a ruin of disbelief and terror. He saw no mercy in her eyes, only a quiet, final judgment. He picked up the pen, his hand shaking so violently he could barely hold it, and signed his name. His grand inheritance was gone. His future was a crater. Later that evening, Margaret's phone buzzed one last time. It was a text from David. There were no pictures, no emojis, just 3 pathetic words. I am so sorry. She stared at the message for a long moment. Then, with a calm, final press of her thumb, she selected his contact and chose the option, block this caller. The ledger was balanced. The debt was paid.
The silence in Margaret's home was different now. It was not the hollow quiet of a house occupied by strangers, but the deep, resonant peace of a reclaimed sanctuary. The beige swatches and chrome fixtures were the first to go, hauled away like the evidence of a crime scene. In their place, Margaret's life returned, piece by piece. The well-loved armchair positioned perfectly in the morning sun, the worn copy of Pride and Prejudice back on the nightstand, the familiar scent of lavender and old wood once again filling the halls. Her home was no longer a gilded cage or a battlefield. It was simply a quiet shore. She didn't revel in her victory. There was no joy in her son's ruin. There was only a profound and weary sense of justice. She had not sought a war, but when it came to her door, she had finished it. Her days found a new, gentle rhythm. She reconnected with old friends, joined a local gardening club, and started volunteering at the library twice a week, helping children learn to read. She was not just escaping a bad past, she was actively building a better future, one brick of peace at a time. Her most cherished new connection was with a neighbor, a retired history professor named Alan, who lived 3 doors down. He would often join her on her porch in the evenings. They didn't speak of David or of betrayal or of the high cost of family. They spoke of history, of books, of the subtle art of coaxing stubborn roses to bloom. His presence was a quiet companionship, a reminder that new foundations could be laid even in the winter of one's life. One cool autumn evening, as they sat watching the sunset, Alan turned to her, a thoughtful look on his face. You seem like a woman who has navigated some serious storms, Margaret, he said gently. And yet, here you are, at peace. Margaret looked out at her garden, at the last of the roses clinging to their stems, defiant against the coming cold. Peace isn't a gift, Alan. It's an acquisition. You have to be willing to pay the price for it. The ghosts of what happened will always live here. The echo of her son's greed, the shadow of her daughter-in-law's ambition, but they no longer have power. This house is a monument not to what was lost, but to what was defended. In a world that often demands forgiveness from the wronged, she chose a different path. She chose consequences. What would you have done? Would you have turned the other cheek? Or would you have burned the bridge to save the shore?